Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's broadcast. I am Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Thursday, February 29th, 2024. We only get to say that once every 4 years, so happy leap day or leap year. Um, Tonight, I'm going to be taking live questions. If you're not familiar with this format, if you're a live attendee, you can submit questions at any time. If you're listening through the podcast and you want to become a part of this discussion, you can always submit questions, suggestions, comments to webinar@evoketherapy.com. Any questions that come in will be put into the queue in the order that they're received. I'll always start with the pre-submitted questions, and then any live questions that come from our audience will be moderated by Michelle, who's helping me out tonight, and she'll put those or post those questions in the order that they're received. Before we get into tonight's topic, I just want to make the announcements of upcoming things. If you want to do a deep dive in your own work, the in-person Finding You has a couple of spots left, March 20th through 24th. This is a 4.5-day intensive that really looks at our history, really goes into the unconscious work. I've been talking with a therapist today that I've been training and talking about how so many therapies are skill-based and psychoeducation-based, which can be very helpful for a lot of people. But that's the conscious stuff. The intensive work is to look into our past and to engage in experiential activities that really uncover the psychological energy that's really calling the shots. So if you want to do a deep dive, if you want to springboard into your work, if you want to find out what's beneath the defense, March 20th through 24th is that offering. And again, I have one spot left for the March 6th through 10th, Returning to You, which is the sequel to Finding You. So just a week left for that. If at the last minute you are an alumni of our Finding You program and you want to join, I will be running that one next week. Looking really forward to that. So with that, let's get into our pre-submitted question. We only have one tonight that's pre-submitted, but I see that some are coming in from the live audience. So let me get to this first one. Somebody writes, I just listened to today's podcast where Dr. Reedy suggests parents of adult children addicts do not share or give advice. I'm in conflict because my daughter's child, age 8, is at times in danger. How do I stand by without inquiring about how she is kept safe? It seems like if a child is in danger, this rule doesn't apply. As always, I can't give you advice not to give advice because I'm betraying my own rule. Really, what I want to say is there are other ways to talk about it that don't provoke the defense. Advice has this energy to it that I know the truth. I know absolutely what's going on, and I'm gonna dispense my wisdom to you. And not only am I gonna dispense my wisdom, but there's an imperative. There's a judgment. This is the right thing to do. I know the truth about this, and the fact of the matter is that we don't know it, but we don't know anybody else's truth. We really don't. We don't know what they should do in their life. But as always, if somebody's running across the street and going to get hit by a car, it's okay to tackle them, right? That there are situations where these rules don't apply. In the case that you're describing, you can ask questions. You can ask your daughter how she feels. You can share with her some thoughts that you're having. The difference between advice is saying you shouldn't let your daughter play on, unsupervised on a computer. That's advice. You shouldn't do this. That's the best thing to do. You should get some kind of software installed. You should do this or that. But you can say, when that happens, something comes up for me and it brings up this question or concern about her safety. And I'm wondering if you thought about, or, my thinking is it might be helpful. See my language? It might be helpful. I found it helpful. You could try this. And then if the defense is provoked, right? If the person gets defensive, you can back off or drop it. Remember, the goal isn't to give advice or dispense wisdom so that we can check off our box that we've done the right thing. That's the ego. That's for us. The goal is to help people that are in danger in this case, or to help people that might be struggling. So the difference between saying, here's what works for me, or here's my thought, or I have a crazy idea, or I'm having this reaction or this feeling, I have this question, have you thought about this? Those are ways where you can talk that it doesn't come with the same kind of energy. Now, if you simply are saying the things, but really the energy behind it is what's best and they should do it, they might feel that. But if the goal is to help the person that you love, or the person that you're working with, the person that you're talking to, if that's the goal, then you're going to take into account defense and resistance. You're going to try not to participate in the provocation of the defense. You're going to try not to provoke it to come out, and because then information is not going to get through. So yes, you can share thoughts, ideas, questions. You can ask where she's at, but this is a tricky one because she's the parent, and I'm sure that her that she's on guard, right? She's on the watch and ready for mom and dad to tell her the right way to be and to tell her how she's blowing it. So that's a really tricky moment. One piece of one idea that I have for doing this that I found to be effective, you notice me using the language now, is I think it's most effective most of the time when the iron is cold. We don't strike while the iron is hot. When there is dysregulation, or when we're very upset or scared or angry, or they might be in a situation which compromises their nervous system. So talking about it when you're not in the moment can be more helpful, is less likely to provoke the defense. So there are ways to talk about and exchange wisdom. My favorite, of course, is through some kind of confession. Oftentimes when I'm in this place with my children, if I'm going to talk about something, I'll say, I watched this, or I saw this, and this is what works for me. Or I simply confess that I've struggled with the same thing. I've struggled with setting boundaries. I've struggled with communicating openly. I've struggled with being dishonest with my feelings and thoughts to try to avoid conflict. I've struggled with breaking off. Right? I can talk about virtually every behavior. If I go deep enough, I'm going to find the core truth, the core idea, that fear of being rejected, that fear of being judged, that fear of not being good enough, that fear of not being worthy of connection and love, not being important or valuable. And at that level, we can almost connect to everybody in every situation. So finding a way to share, finding a way to talk about your own experience, finding a way to confess your own dilemma, your own struggle with this. One of my favorites is if you see your child struggling with peer pressure. I've talked with parents about this in the past. If you see your child struggling with peer pressure, you can say to them, I too struggle with peer pressure. Even though I'm 55 years old, I sometimes worry what the neighbors think. I sometimes worry what people think when I talk about going to therapy, or when I talk about us having struggles or problems. I sometimes worry about people judging me for the car that I drive, for the house whatever it might be, for for the weight that I've gained, whatever it might be. And in someone doing that, you're down regulating the nervous system. You're getting it to a more calm and settled place. And what you will find often is the child will give you the lecture on peer pressure. If you say something like, you have to pick yourself up from your bootstraps, self-esteem is an inside job. You can't go around expecting everybody to love you. That's cheap, and it's just ridiculous. Because everybody struggles with this at some level. And so confessing it makes it safe, and you'll often gain access to the child's wisdom. But the problem isn't data or information most of the time. Most parents think that the real wisdom, the real gift that they have to give to their children are the lectures, the teaching, the advice, which is at the far end of the lecture spectrum, so to speak. But really what they're going to benefit most from is how you are. Your own teachability, your own humility. Can you apologize for your contribution, even if your contribution to the problem is only 2% as you see it, and the other person is responsible for 98% of the conflict? Take responsibility for your 2%. Learn to show up and show your child how to be human. Learn to share with them your struggles. And I know that for a lot of families, for a lot of parents, they worry that being vulnerable like that will reduce them in terms of the stature and the child looking up to them. And if your life is based on power and hierarchy, it will do that for sure. But if your parenting and relationships are based on humanity and connection and mutual respect, love, compassion, non-judgment, then it doesn't do anything but improve the situation. If you worry that confessing some of your mistakes and some of your struggles is going to give your children permission to struggle themselves. It's going to remove from them any responsibility or accountability. It doesn't do that either. Unless, of course, your parenting or your relationship is built on power and hierarchy, then it does do that. But that type of structure in a family system, that type of structure, and of course, parents have the right to make decisions. There is a hierarchy in some ways, but I'm talking about like a spiritual, emotional, psychological hierarchy. The job is to teach and demonstrate to your children how to be human. And to do that, you've got to be in the muck with them to a large extent. So, yes, you can pass on wisdom, but that's not the goal. The goal is your work. The gold is how much work you've done to uncover your conscious material, the energy that's running the show. And that will make all the difference in the world for your children, for anybody that you're dealing with. Great question. Thank you for it. All right. Somebody writes in tonight. I've heard you talk about one's defenses. Can you talk more about this? How would I discover my own defenses? How could I understand my young adult children's defenses? And then how could this inform how I relate to them? I love this question so much. I'm going to bring you through a few steps. I could talk about this one for the rest of the hour, although I welcome any follow-up questions that you have. Any questions that any of you have from the live audience. But here we go. The defense is the defense is something that we put up as a to get rid of a threat, to protect us against a threat. Right? If you give me feedback, if you criticize me, if you say something to me and I get defensive, I justify, I rationalize, I deny, I counterattack, right? Those behaviors are demonstrative of the fact that I'm not feeling safe. So what's the threat? Well, the threat is universally, almost universally, the threat is that I'm being judged as bad, that I'm not worthy of love, that I'm going to be rejected or abandoned, that intimacy is going to be withdrawn. So the threat is the threat of shame and guilt. It's really all we are treating in psychotherapy. It's what differentiates the psychotherapist from the teacher or the psychotherapist from the average parent. Even me as a parent, it can differentiate me between me in that role as a therapist and me in the role of a parent or a spouse. So what you're up against is the person's undone work, the fact that they haven't made peace with the fact that they're absolutely, positively, inescapably human. You see, the mistake is human. Every parent makes mistakes. Every partner makes mistakes. Every friend, every coworker, everybody makes mistakes. That is inescapable. And that's not what does the damage. What does the damage is the defense. And it looks like gaslighting. That's what it looks like. It looks like I didn't do that. What it feels, this is the crazy thing. This is the craziest thing. What it feels like in your head is they don't understand me. They're not seeing the whole picture, the whole perspective. They're not seeing my intention, my context. They're missing something. They don't get me. One of the ways that you can tell the difference between a defense and a mere explanation is that if somebody cuts you off while you're explaining something and it's not a defense, you can drop it pretty easily. If you told me you were frustrated that I was late tonight starting the broadcast, if you typed that in the comments, and let's say I were explaining why I did it, and you said I don't need an explanation, if I wasn't feeling threatened, I would say, okay. But if I was feeling threatened, I would need to explain that to you. I would need for you to see it from my side. I would need for you not to be mad at me. I would need for you to see that my heart is good, right? That I'm okay, that I'm not a bad person with nefarious, with malicious intent. So the defense is the defense against being bad. And it's all over the place. all the time. It's omnipresent in our lives. It's omnipresent for us, right? I shared an old post today, just in my story on Instagram. I shared it and it said, mental health is knowing your mental illness. And in a large way, that's true. What that means is I know that I have insecurities. I know that I don't always feel good about myself. I know that I want people to think that I'm wonderful, that I'm beautiful and talented and amazing. I want people to be drawn to me. I want people to value me. I want people to see worth in me. I want people to think that I'm good. Now, if I know I'm good and beautiful and wonderful, if I know I have value, I don't need people to see it, right? I just know it. And their inability to see it then, I realize if I know I'm all those things, their inability to see it is about them, is about their level of consciousness. So much of this, I love this question. Thank you for asking. I feel like it's a question that I told someone to ask me tonight. It's exactly what I wanted to talk about. If somebody doesn't have contact with their horrible, rotten self, the parts of themselves, like I always talk about, you know, you're beautiful, you're amazing, you're glorious, you're talented, you're powerful, you're courageous, you're generous, you're gifted, you're smart. Think of all the wonderful, you might be a fast runner, you might be really a talented artist, you might be really good in business, you might be an excellent doctor, you might have the greatest memory, you might be able to give public speeches, you might be a wonderful writer, right? Whatever the thing is, all of those things are wonderful. Those are fantastic. But what's missing in most human relationships and most relationships between parent and child is that the parts of us that are sometimes not generous but selfish and greedy, the parts of us that are sometimes not powerful and courageous but are scared and weak, the fact that sometimes we are cruel and not kind, the fact that sometimes we fail and don't live up to our potential. Those parts of us which are a part of being human, this is what Jung is talking about when he refers to it, when he says, I would rather be whole than good, because good is only part of you. The Guru Ram Dass says that the counter to I am bad can't be I am good. You can't win it over because you're both, right? You are both powerful and weak. You are generous and greedy. You are scared and courageous. So what goes so counterintuitive to the dominant culture and to what the world is teaching is we have to learn to love the parts of ourselves. And if we make peace with those, that's the difference between the average person and the mystics, the gurus, the prophets, the people whose messages and teachings endure over hundreds of years, the people that we look up to. The difference between them and the rest of us is they've made peace with the horrible, rotten self. So you can't use it against them. There's no reason for the defense. See, all of this work is if we can develop enough self-love for all the parts of ourselves, if we can kill the ego, and the ego is that part of us that tries to protect us, the part of us that puts the defense in place. If we can kill the ego, let go of the ego, let it die over time with a lot of work, and just be who we are, we won't have conflict. We won't be stressed out. We will become who we are. And that will be enough. And it's the greatest joy. It's what Joseph Campbell believed that religious people have been talking about when they talk about heaven or even God or nirvana or bliss. It is this point when you find this relationship with yourself that is honest, right? You have to deal with the parts of yourself that you're avoiding to do this work. And our children expose those parts in us, and they show up by our reactiveness, by our constant anxiety, by our resentment, by our rage, right? Those are the moments that parts of us that we haven't explored and we haven't made peace within ourselves. Those are the moments when the messenger of our reaction, the trauma response that happens in our body is inviting us to look at parts of ourselves, to understand who we are, not who we want to be, not who we hope to be, not who we aspire to be, not who we're told to be by God or religion or a therapist or Dr. Brad Reedy or Sigmund Freud, not from those people, not Brene Brown, right? You are who you are. And if you deal with that, you won't need the symptoms and the defenses anymore. You will have grown to a point that those won't be necessary because you're not threatened when somebody's upset. You're happy to be alone because you love yourself, all of yourself. And it's the best feeling in the world. It's what Rumi, the prophet, or excuse me, the poet, meant when he said, the desire to know your own soul will end all other desires. Or in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, when they say, the kingdom of heaven is within you. He who knows himself shall find it. This is what they've been saying the whole time, but it gets misinterpreted so often. And everything gets put into our brains as a should and a shouldn't. My therapist said something. I said to her a few months back, I said, what are we not talking about? And she thought for a few minutes. She said to me, because she knows I have a lot of social anxiety, and she said, I think you can go out into the world and you'll be okay. And I knew what she was saying. She said she was just reflecting back of the work that I've done, and the pandemic really exacerbated my social anxiety. But she said, I think you can go out to the world. Now, what did I hear? I heard in my brain, you should go out into the world. The right thing to do is to go out into the world. I heard advice, even though she didn't give it as advice, because that's the way my brain operates. And I felt guilt and shame about not living up to that. I had discussions in my head to justify why I didn't need to go back out there. And then I have this recent experience that I've shared in the podcast in the last 2 weeks where I went back out there. I went to this, I'm not talking about doing business and operating generally in the world. I mean, putting myself out there, showing up to social events and small talk and dinner parties. Those kinds of moments. Those are the ones that provoke my anxiety. But I had a recent one where I went out there into the world, and because of the work that I've done, it was the most incredible experience I've had in my entire life on a spiritual, emotional level. I knew who I was, and I kept hold of that. I didn't lose it. I didn't need to practice the defense of thinking about how I was better than other people or worried that I would make a mistake, because it didn't matter, because I know myself. And it was a joy that's really hard to describe. It was a spiritual experience. Just being able to walk around in public without the social anxiety and staying connected to who I am, and not just the good parts, because that's the defense, right? That's what I've done. I've tried to stave off the anxiety by talking in my head about how smart I am, how good I am, how professionally successful I am, how educated I am, right? And that looks and feels like narcissism. It is narcissism. That's why it looks and feels that way. But in my head, what narcissism feels like on the inside is terrified and insecure and desperate to maintain this semblance of a self. So what we're up against, folks, is the defense. Jamie said to me, that's what she meant. My therapist said to me a couple of months back. I've shared this quote that I just love, when I confessed something that was going on in the relationship with my wife that week, and I had a big part of it. And Jamie said to me with a smile, she said, the news just gets worse and worse in therapy, doesn't it? And we both laughed, a belly laugh. And she's right. The news gets worse and worse, but I have less shame. I know more about how damaged I am today and what my defenses look like and where they come from and how they show up and how they hurt people. I know more about that than I've ever known in my entire life. And there's more to learn. There's more to learn. There's more to grow. There's more to expand. I know more than I've ever known, though, in my life at this point. And part of that is because I've had that much success with shame and guilt. So the goal is self-love. And how do we get self-love? Well, don't believe the people that tell you that you get it by just loving yourself. Maybe that works for some people. But what psychology teaches us and what attachment theory shows us and what the science demonstrates is You learn to love yourself by being loved by somebody else. And not love like our parents gave us for our successes and the celebration of our accomplishments and the pretty and wonderful and talented parts of ourselves. That's not love. That's just admiration. Alice Miller says, without psychotherapy, it's almost impossible to cut the tragic link between admiration and love. That's the narcissistic wound, right? That if I'm good, I will be loved. But that when somebody comes into the session and says, I did this horrible thing, I did this very selfish, this very cruel, this very dumb, this very uninsightful, this very immature and unevolved thing, my response is, okay with me. I get it. I've done things like that or worse or often. That's what's needed. And then after a while, the person realizes, wait a second. This critical voice inside my head for all my fallibilities, it's not my voice. It came from somewhere else. And you know where it came from most of the time? It came from my parents' worry. It came from my parents' anxiety, which they called love. They called caring. They called it looking out for my best interest. That's what they called it. But what it felt like inside of me is something just fundamentally unlovable about me. If I'm causing the people who are supposed to welcome and celebrate me the most, if I'm causing them to be disappointed and upset and angry and anxious and frustrated, if I'm causing that, then I must be the problem. So then we start to create stories in our head. I wrote this the other day. If you tell yourself a story about a recent interaction or struggle or dilemma or conflict or mistake, whatever it is, if you're telling yourself a story and the story ends with you being the good guy, you're back at the beginning. Try again. Go to psychotherapy until you have the strength and the confidence and the humility, which, by the way, humility is strength and confidence. Go to therapy until you realize the things that you have to apologize for the people that are closest to you. Maybe the people that work with you or for you. Go to therapy long enough until you feel good enough that you have love to give to the world. And you're not spending all that energy defending yourself against the threat of being unlovable yourself. Spend enough time with a capable, empathic, non-judgmental other. Spend as much time with as you can for as long as you can until that sensibility starts to creep into your psyche and starts to erase or repair the fear and the criticism. This is why, and this is going to be the last thing I'll say about this. This is why I spend so much time teaching therapists, stop confronting defenses. It does no good to say to somebody, you're justifying, you're rationalizing, you're in denial, you're minimizing, you're blaming, you're projecting. You attack the defense and the defense gets bigger because the defense is a scared attempt to ward off the threat. So how do you help with the defense? You become a safe enough person that you're not a threat anymore. You make enough of a friendship, of a love relationship with your own horrible, rotten self, and there's plenty there. There is plenty there. You make friends with those parts in yourself, and then when you see them in another person, they don't freak you out. That's what Jung meant when he said, if you want to understand the darkness of others, the best method for understanding the darkness of others is to understand your own darkness. Those are the secrets of this psychology that's right in front of our face, but we don't see because we have so little experience of it. And I got lucky enough to find a classically trained therapist who has done her work and who has dealt with her own darkness herself. Her greatest gift to me, having been the work that she did in her own analysis and therapy for many, many years. And so she can sit with me. And when I do something dumb, time after time after time after time, and I get sick of doing it, and I even get sick of talking about it, she shows more patience and compassion. Right? I want to quit therapy because I'm sick of hearing myself say the same thing. And she will say to me, I know what that feels like. She told me the story one time when we were having coffee at a conference, at a professional conference, that she said to one of her analysts, she said, "I just don't know how you can put up with me." And the analyst said to her, "I think we should talk about that next week. That seems to be really important." And when she said that, I got the chills and tears came out of my eyes, literally. And I said, it's almost impossible to imagine that anybody would love me if they really got to know me, everything about me. Yes, I know people admire the cool parts and the smart parts and the funny parts, but that other stuff, I've not had the experience where people have been okay with it. I didn't have it in my childhood, and in the first 15 years, 10 years of my marriage, didn't have much of it either. Didn't have it at work, didn't have it with friends. So that's the defense. And that's what we're up against, all of us. So do your work and you will become the person that doesn't participate or contribute to the defense. You can't tear it away from somebody. You can't steal their crutches. You can't confront it away. All of those things make the problem worse. But you present yourself to them as a human and a safe person, and the threat starts to, over time, diminish. They'll give up their crutches. It's a pain in the butt. Crutches take a lot of energy, both metaphorically and literally. And so when the knee heals, metaphorically, or when the self-esteem, the self-worth heals, and the self-love improves, you don't need the crutches anymore. That's what this work is about. Thank you for that. Somebody writes in, how do you teach a child that rejects religion, what is right versus wrong? I don't know if you saw this. I don't use the words right versus wrong. I don't think that those are good. I don't think that those are the most effective ways to teach morality. I think you teach people how to feel. I wrote about that in The Journey of the Heroic Parent. The way that I teach morality to my children is I teach them how to feel. And when you learn to feel all of your feelings, you recognize them in others. When you don't learn to feel, you don't see them in others. So I'm not so sure that religion teaches morality very well, or right or wrong teaches morality very well. It can in the right hands, but it's not been my experience. It's hit or miss. So you teach your children by showing them, and not showing them a perfect parent. That will create the defense. You teach them by showing them your human stuff. You teach them by modeling apologies. You teach them by modeling kindness and generosity, because you're doing good self-care, so you have kindness to give. This stuff is all deeper than right or wrong. I posted today a quote on my story. In fact, this is just from today, not my quote, somebody else's, but I love it. Somebody said, it was Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche said, "Whatever is done for love always occurs beyond good and evil." There's something bigger than the ideas of right and wrong. It's love. Right? That's what Rumi meant when he said, out beyond right doing and wrong doing, there's a field, I will meet you there. That's why in Les Mis, Victor Hugo's story, when Jean Valjean stole from the bishop and the bishop offered him grace, Jean Valjean just wanted to go back out there and give that grace away. See, when you experience grace and love and non-judgment and compassion, and it seeps into your soul, you just want to give it to everybody else. If that can be taught within the construct and confines of religion, wonderful. That's what it's meant to do in the first place. But if not, then the images and the ideas and the stories that we're worshiping are just idols. It's idol worship, because they have no spirit in them. They have no soul in them. This, all the wars in the world are fought over who's right and who's wrong. Both the wars on a global scale and the wars inside of our homes and our own hearts. It's not the answer. I know it seems like it. And I'm not teaching an amorality, a non-morality. If you do this work, if you, as Nietzsche and Joseph Campbell suggest, if you slay the dragon of should and should not, if you slay the dragon, all that will be left is love. You'll have no ego. You'll have nothing to defend against. You'll be able to apologize, and you'll have more energy, compassion, love, generosity to give. Because all the energy that was spent defending yourself can now be reallocated to giving your gifts to the world. Victor Hugo's story of Les Mis is about this idea. This is how people are healed. So, wonderful question. Somebody writes, I recently asked my husband for a divorce and expressed that I wanted to be with other people. I was met with a lot of shame and accusations of not giving our 12-year marriage another chance, accusations of having an affair, being told I got everything I wanted. I finally took the step through the door into my journey, and I am floundering at finding the next step forward. I feel defeated, guilty, ashamed, and misunderstood. I know I can't turn back, but I feel awful and uncomfortable and hopeless. Oh, I'm sure you do. I am so sorry. And I'm glad you're here tonight. This is a live question. I'm glad you're here tonight. I shared, again, I only tell you that I'm sharing this, not to tell you how wonderful my social media feed is, but just to show you how relevant your questions are to the things that I'm thinking about every day. One of the quotes that I talked about this recently was that when the way in front of you is unclear, that lets you know you're on your path. If the way in front of you is clear, you're not on your path, you're on somebody else's path. And when you get to the point where it's darkest, the answer is keep going. Just keep going. You're on the right path. You're on the path toward becoming yourself. And what will be on the other side is more love to give, more love for yourself, deeper connection. I feel for your husband too. I'm sure he's confused and hurt and scared. And he's covering that up with anger and using shame and accusations and name calling to try to get you back into line. And I have no opinion about what you should do with your marriage whatsoever, one way or the other. But taking you at face value, what you're saying, this is what it feels like, a spiritual awakening. In Brene Brown's first most famous talk that she gave that put her on the map, she shares this story about how she was going through a midlife crisis. She was having a nervous breakdown, and her therapist called it a spiritual awakening. And it's the same thing. That was her point. It's the same thing. So keep going. Find somebody. You know what therapists that I respect will say about this is just keep going. But you don't have to go alone. Find somebody who can go with you, and somebody who has the patience that I've described tonight, who can, as Ram Dass says, who can stand beside you and walk you home. Ram Dass says we're all just walking each other home. I'm glad you're here tonight. You're not my client. I don't know your name. The questions come to me anonymously, but I know what that feels like. You know, watch movies and you'll find that when the hero crosses that threshold and breaks from the culture, it is devastating. In Frozen, she goes to the ice castle, right? In movies, everything becomes chaotic and crazy and dark and scary and confusing and lonely initially. But what you find on the other side is everything you've been looking for your whole life. You that's what Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz found out, is that story is this story. It is the hero's journey. It was in her all along. What the wizard finally told her. It was in her all along. She thought it was out there, and the cast of characters thought that the problems were out there, but it was in there all along. So I just feel for you, and it's hard, it's scary, it's lonely. Read books by James Hollis, The Middle Passage. Start there and read Finding Meaning in the Second Half of Life. Read The Eden Project, the broadcast I just did 2 nights ago. Read things by James Hollis because he talks a lot about this stage. You know, James Hollis had to go into psychoanalysis to become an analyst. He had to do his own Jungian analysis, and it destroyed his life. Or at least it destroyed the life that he was living. But that's what heroes have to do. Everything you want is on the other side of that. Death in our stories is often a motif signaling this fact that the old life is dying. Suicidal people often make the mistake of thinking that they have to kill the whole self, when really they just have to kill part of themselves and they are free. So keep going, and the only cost, the only payment that is required for this work is the life that you are now living. As Campbell says, we must be willing to give up the life that we are living in order to find the life that is waiting for us. The cave that we fear to enter, he says, holds the treasure we seek. When the hero goes into the forest, dives into the deep ocean, goes into the darkness, goes away from the dominant culture, the messages of his or her or their family. When the hero does that, that's the moment when they leave behind everything that's familiar. And what they find is everything. Everything. And your children, if you are a parent of a child in our program or an alumni, if you're a parent of an alumni child in our program, what Campbell and the myths would teach us, what the psychology of Jung and Freud and Winnicott and all those folks would teach us, is that your children are exposing parts of you that need to be addressed, that need to be looked at, that are now being manifested and passed on to them. It's not easy. It doesn't mean that you ought not to send them to therapy or to treatment, because sometimes things are dangerous and scary and sketchy. And it is our job to do our best to see if we can support our children on their journey to get where they need to go. And if they die, they can't get there. But beyond that, you being whoever's on this tonight, you're here because the call has happened to you. And you're either just listening to it, or you've been listening to it for a while and you're following it. Thank you. Great question. All right. Is that it for tonight? Is that all the questions that have come in, Michelle? I think so. I'm really glad to be with you guys tonight. This feeds my soul. And your questions and where you're at in your life, I just have respect and empathy and compassion. And I've been there too. So let me go over the upcoming announcements. My 2 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to do a deep dive into your own work, March 20th through 24th is that offering here in Utah. Just contact intensives@evoketherapy.com. We also have online offerings, and of course, the sequel to Finding You, Returning to You, March 6th. There's 1 spot left if you want to join us. If you want to attend a support group tonight, there's a support group for our alumni of our Willis program, our parents of our alumni or our current parents. February 29th tonight at 7 p.m., just in about 10 minutes. You can hop on that. If you are an alumni of our program and you've been through it already, March 18th is that offering. Once a month, we have an alumni only meeting, 6 p.m. on March 18th. For our intensives and coaching alumni and current clients, March 11th is your support group, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Contact supportgroups@evoketherapy.com to find out more. If you want a coach that can help you with this work, that can do this kind of attachment-based work that we're talking about, our coaches have been exposed to this, come from a variety of backgrounds, but all share that Evoke connection. Contact coaching@evoketherapy.com to find a coach that works for you. We ask all current parents to try at least 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can also go to RefugeRecovery.org, a Buddhist-inspired recovery program, less of an emphasis on a higher power, if that is one of the blocks for you. And then, of course, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI.org, has free classes and resources in your local community. All of these broadcasts are available on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just go to wherever you consume podcasts and search for Finding You, an Evoke Therapy podcast. Subscribe there, and you'll be notified when the new episodes drop. You can also go to SoundCloud on your computer, soundcloud.com on your computer, and listen there. And Evoke's YouTube channel has the rebroadcast of these, the video broadcast of these the next day. You can find Evoke Therapy programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on X, Threads, and Instagram using the handles @Evoke Therapy and @Dr. Brad Reedy. That's DrBradReedy. You can also find Evoke Therapy Intensives on Instagram using the handle @Evoke Therapy Intensives. And on Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our blog has wonderful content each week. All right, folks, my next broadcast will be what to look for in a therapist. That'll be next Tuesday, March 5th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time, what to look for in a therapist. One of my very favorite topics to talk about and to teach about. So I look forward to that. As always, thank you for joining me. I hope this is a helpful point of contact for you. And for and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for showing up to things like this and doing your work. It makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening. I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.